The gods would held the chill like a secret, and snow clung to the leaves of the heart tree in a way that made it seem the face was wearing the winter as a mask. Jon stood beneath that carved red gaze, his glove off and fingers bare against the bark, feeling the roughness as if it were an old man's knuckles. Ghost lay nearby on the leaf-strewn ground, white as drift, his red eyes half-lidded and unblinking as always. The air in the gods would always smell damp even when the rest of the castle held smoke and roast and horse. There was a silence here that felt older than men, older than stone, older than the words carved into old birch and elm. He knew he should be in the yard seeing to the horses. He had promised Hullen he would check the bits and girths for wear before the king arrived, but the need to come here had pulled him like a current. He had not prayed. Prayer felt like asking favors of a thing that did not care, but he had listened. He liked to imagine the gods here did not speak with a voice but with weather, with the creaking of branches, with the furled red tears of the leaves that fell into the water. There was a comfort in pretending they watched and did not judge. That was more than most men offered a bastard. A faint horn sounded far off, the sound thinned by the cold. Ghost's ears turned, and the wolf rose on silent paws. Jon lifted his hand from the tree and the bark clung a moment to his fingertips, sticky with sap like a healer's poultice. He pulled his glove on and listened. The horn sounded again, closer now. It was the clear, thin call of the watchers on the outer wall. Nothing like the hooting and bellowing that would fill the rocks when the huntsman rode. The royal party had been sighted. He walked back the way he had come, through the gate that sagged a little on its iron banding. A dusting of new snow lay on the path and it softened his steps. At the edge of the gods would the wind bit him as if glad to be free of the leaves. He pulled his cloak tighter and let Ghost slip ahead of him, the wolf weaving between the old oaks like a pale thread drawn through coarse cloth. Castle folk were already moving toward the gatehouse, their breath drifting before them in ragged pennants. Boys ran, their excitement cracking their voices as thin as ice. His brothers would be there, the trueborn ones in their best jackets with Catelyn Stark's hand to smooth a wayward collar, and he could join them and stand at the edge of their rightful place. Or he could go to the stables. He went to the stables. The straw was musty but familiar, and the horses blew warm against the cold. The stable boys were everywhere at once, faces red, fingers clumsy in their haste. Hullen's voice cut through it, a hoarse, patient sound like a saw cutting thick planks. Jon moved along the row of stalls and noted without thinking the small things, where the hay net was tied too low, where the water bucket was half empty and the nose that nuzzled his palm seeking more. The saddles lay ready, rubbed down with fat until they gleamed, and the leather smelled rich and tallow-sweet. He checked girths without being told and corrected a strap that had been buckled one hole too tight. Ghost paced with him until Hullen snapped at him to take that white shadow outside because the Maras were nervous enough. From the yard the horns were louder, and over them came another sound, a deep rolling like distant thunder, hooves on frozen ground. The captain of Winterfell's guard shouted and the gate creaked like an old ship. The shouting changed timbre, turned to cheers. Jon wiped his hands on his breeches out of habit and stepped out into the castle yard just as the first of the banners came through the gatehouse. They were bright in the cold light, golden lions that made men turn their heads, a crowned stag on black that made them bow, and a forest of lesser arms that Jon did not know but whose bearers rode tall in the knowledge that they rode beside a king. The sound rose and fell against the stone like surf. Jon felt the brush of Ghost's flank and put a hand there to steady himself without knowing why he needed steadying. Robert Baratheon came last, as was proper, though there was nothing proper in his manner. He rode a horse that seemed too small for him, a huge black destrier that towered above even the other stallions, and yet the man still dwarfed it. He wore a fur-trimmed cloak that threw off snow whenever he moved, and a helm with antlers like a forest at sunset. He was laughing as he came under the arch, his beard frosted, his cheeks as red as a drunk's, yet somehow in that moment the mirth did not make him foolish. It made him enormous. Beside him rode the queen, a figure of green and gold and distance, posture as rigid as the spear that rode at her guard's knee. Her hair was a fall of sunlight that seemed to not know winter. Jon made himself look away. He searched the riders for men he had heard named by his brothers, the Kingslayer, all in mirrored gold, and there he was, gleaming like a gilt statue in the gray. A small man with mismatched eyes? No, that was a tale about a sellsword. He saw instead a smaller man whose face was sharp with wit and weariness both. His hair a pale gold like straw that has dried under a summer sun, riding a massive black pony and looking at everything with an interest he did not feign. That would be the queen's brother, the dwarf, as the kitchen brats said, with the careless cruelty of those who do not expect to be overheard. Tyrion Lannister, who read even while he walked, they said. Jon found himself liking the look of the man without reason, and then scolded himself for the softness a liking was. The king halted in the yard and swung a leg down with the heavy grace of a man who once had been light. The Lord of Winterfell stepped forward, and Jon watched his father bow his head and then take the king in his arms in a hug that made the court gasp and then laugh and then, by dint of the king's booming pleasure, cheer again. Ned Stark's smile was rare as a comet. It made something hurt in Jon in a way he did not like to name. He told himself sternly to be glad and to stop thinking of the fatherly things that were not his to claim. He watched from the stable yard with the rest of the lesser folk and kept Ghost at heel with a wordless noise in his throat that the wolf understood. Beneath the laughter and the clatter and the slow parade of important people into important places, Winterfell went about its business with the stolid efficiency it had learned over centuries. Fires were stoked to a huge heat in the big hall until the smoke hung low among the rafters like 100 tongues of dark ribbon, and the cooks conscripted boys with strong elbows to turn the spits until their shoulders burned and a wider circle of meat, that endless wheel of roast boar, roast beef, roast fowl, turned before the flames. Jon carried buckets of water where they were needed because that was work no one could object to him doing, and because it kept him moving. Moving made him less likely to be stopped by someone who might tell him he did not belong wherever he happened to be. He did not go near the place where his father's household was ordered to receive, where Catelyn Stark might lay a cool hand upon his own chest with a look that could freeze the ocean if she chose to. He kept to corridor and kitchen and the margins of rooms, always aware of Ghost a pace behind his left heel. Sometimes he turned and the wolf was not there and his heart would have some small drop of a fall in it before Ghost reappeared from under a table or from behind someone's boots, silent and glaring. Hullen clapped him on the shoulder once and said something about the White One always making the Maras nervous, and Jon smiled because Hullen had never spoken a cruel word to him in his memory, which was not to say he had ever spoken a kind one either. Jon had learned to recognize kindness in absences, and to treasure them as if they were warm rooms in a cold house. The feast was a river that would not stop. It flowed until the benches were too weary to bear it, and then more benches were dragged and the river flowed on. The noise got inside the stone and made the walls hum a little, and there were moments when Jon could feel the floorboards vibrate beneath his boots. He took an empty jug down the hall to fetch ale, and when he came back someone had already refilled the flagon he had left for Hullen, and he left the second near the far end of the tables where the men who were not necessary to be seen sat shoulder to shoulder and did the work of celebrating the way they did the work of mucking out stalls or patching a breached section of palisade. Simply, without fretting, knowing that there would always be more to do. He accepted a trencher someone wordlessly thrust at him, its edges tacky with grease, and ate standing, tearing the meat with his teeth because Ghost was watching and the wolf had little patience for ceremony. He did finally venture a look at the high table when the hall had reached a roar that disguised glances. The king sat beneath Winterfell's gray banner and his own black stag, and did the thing that Robert Baratheon did better than anyone living. He took a room and made it belong to him. He drank too much and laughed too loudly and his fingers were slick with fat, but he looked happy in a way that infected men who resented him for it in the morning. At his side, the queen smiled with the sort of precision that suggested that smiling was something that could be done like embroidery, with neat small stitches that showed the skill of the hand and not the heart. Jon's father sat there too, his expression hard to read even for a son hungry to read it. Sometimes Ned Stark turned his face in a way that made the torchlight catch the white strands at his temples, and in those moments he looked older than Jon believed his father could be. He looked down on the hall sometimes and the watchers pretended not to be watching, and Jon pretended with them even as something in him leaned toward the man as if he were a fire. When at last the parts of the feast at which he was expected to fetch and carry were done, Jon slid out while the hall took its breath for the next course. He went along into the passage where the air was cooler and the light less eager. He found the little niche under the stair to the minstrel's gallery because it had always been his and Arya's place to breathe. Ghost slipped in before him with a ripple of muscle and a head that brushed his knee. The wolf huffed and put his chin on Jon's boot. Beyond, from the hall, the song changed the texture of the noise for a minute. Someone was playing something that sounded like water thawed, and then the king's laugh broke it like a stone and sent ripples out. "You're the one with the white wolf." Jon had not heard the step. He jerked and swallowed the jump so that when he turned all he did was turn, and turn quietly, and standing with one hand on the stair rail was the queen's brother as Jon had seen him in the yard, although up close the man's eyes were not straw gold but a complicated brown that had its own weather in it. He was smaller than Jon had expected and larger in the way that he occupied the space. He held a cup in one hand and a book in the other. Jon nodded, and then because nodding was ungracious he said, "His name is Ghost." "Tactful choice," the dwarf said. "It's what most of us are to the people who love us." "May I?" He crouched with a visible twinge of joints and extended a hand, palm down, for the wolf to smell. Ghost lifted his head, inspected, and then decided this thing was not prey and not threat and so not important. He lay back down. "You are Jon Snow," the man said. He tasted the words without malice, as if he were tasting a sauce to see if it needed salt. "I've a talent for names. Everyone here knows mine," Jon said, and hat Ed himself for the impatience in the remark as soon as it was spoken. "Yes," Tyrion Lannister said mildly. "It's a bold name for a boy with so many walls in it. Lannister," he added as if Jon did not know, and then, "Tyrion, if we must move past masks. My brother shines and I cast shadows, and both of us are tired of the metaphors. Do you enjoy the songs?" Somewhere in the hall the minstrels began a lay about the trident and spears and a crown of rubies that fell into a river. Jon found his throat closing. "Some of them," he said. "The true ones are too sharp for a feast," Tyrion murmured. "I prefer the ones full of soft lies. They are like good fur cloaks, those lies. They keep you from feeling the wind too much. Your father keeps his truth like a sword under his cloak. It juts sometimes." "Lord Stark is not my father," Jon said, because it was the thing he had said 1,000 times to himself and never to anyone else, and because saying it to this man seemed oddly safe in this moment, like walking along a wall and finding that the ledge was wider than it looked. Tyrion watched him with interest, not pity. "As you wish," he said. "What then do you call him?" "The man who raised me," Jon said. "The man I don't want to shame." "Ah," Tyrion said. "There are worse desires, though I might put it that the man who raised you should be ashamed if he allows shame to reach you. But I do not do as much raising as singing." He sipped his cup and pulled a face. "My sister's wine lacks forgiveness. Most of the things she favors do." He canted his head. "If you want to leave these halls and never return, go to the top of the towers tonight and look out across the snow until the fires of the feast are a red smear. Make a wish in that cold and it will be true in your mouth. If you do not want to leave, stay under these stairs with your white ghost until dawn and it will be true in your bones." Jon said nothing. He had had a place in mind for months that was not Winterfell. It had ladders and black cloaks and vows that had no half measures in them. The thought of it had been a clear, fierce thing in him that kept the petty humiliations from clouding his days. He had spoken of it to Benjen Stark, and the man had listened with a face that did not promise and did not warn. Jon had felt himself light and certain. Now the smell of smoke and pine and roast meat and the sound of men singing about battles they had never seen pressed inside him and made that fierce thing waver. "I'll climb some tower," he said finally. "Good," Tyrion said. "If you fall, try to yell my name on the way down. It will be amusing." He smiled to show he meant no harm, and then he went away in a rolling gait that made no concession to the men who had to get out of his path. Jon stayed under the stairs until the song about the trident stopped and the hall rose to cheer something the king had shouted. He felt Ghost's breath against his ankle and thought of the wall. He looked at the white wolf and thought of the king. He did not think of Catelyn Stark. That was a habit of survival that had become second nature, like breathing during a sword drill. He finished the meat he had been given because he had learned that if you built a plan on an empty belly, it would fall. Later, when the hall began to drain and the men who had been too eager to drink were led to pallets under tables lest they snore in the sight of lords, Jon went to the eastern tower. He climbed until his lungs burned and the wind tried to claw tears from the corners of his eyes. He came out at the top and the stars were brighter than they had any right to be so near all this smoke. The night was the iron of a sword fresh from the quench. He set his hands on the snow-dusted stone and looked. The world was a sheet of ink with starlight pricked into it. The torches along the curtain wall made an orange seam around Winterfell's shape. Far beyond, a ghost light of the aurora flickered a little like a breath held and let go. He closed his eyes to it and made his wish inside his mouth where even the wind could not pry. He did not fall. In the morning, the yard looked as if giants had danced in it. The feast's leavings went out to the kennels and the pigs, and servants with the faces of pebbles endured the curses of hung over men whose authority had softened in the wine. Jon draped himself in his duties like a cloak to hide in, and if he kept his steps along ways that would not carry him past the queen's chambers, he told himself it was because he had no business there. The king took the yard like a conqueror, moving from knot to knot with a ferocity that would have been dangerous if he had remembered a blade. He swore, he clapped backs, he laughed that laugh that seemed to come from somewhere lower than a man's chest. When he swung a practiced sword against a post, there was a moment when all of them could see the boy he had been, and even the old men smiled as if they could feel the years fall from their bones. The king's eyes went everywhere and then they went to Jon. It was not a surprise because Jon had known they must. He had felt that gaze like heat on a cheek even before it turned. When it found him, it stuck with the weight of a spear planted in ground. "You," Robert said, and the yard went quiet with the speed of a curtain falling. "You with the white wolf and the stark face." And then he nodded as though something had been decided, perhaps by someone else. "Come here." Jon looked to see who stood between him and the king who ought to answer that call. There was no one. He stepped into the open because to refuse would be a scene he could not survive. Ghost flowed at his side, muscles moving like secrets beneath fur. Jon gave the wolf a hand signal, a silent word to heel, and Ghost obeyed because he made his own choices and occasionally those choices agreed with Jon's. Robert watched the wolf, then he watched Jon. He had the kind of face that had too much Fey in it to hide any expression. It was as if his skin was a badly fitted glove that wrinkled with every movement of feeling underneath. "What do they call you, boy?" he asked, and though there were men around them in the yard who would later say he had asked in a bellow, Jon heard the question as if the king had said it low. "Jon Snow," he said. "Snow?" The king repeated, and it had a flavor in his mouth. "All my bastards are storms. The north breeds them different." He tilted his head. "They tell me you handle a blade. They tell me many things," Jon said before he could stop himself. He had not meant to be clever. He chose honesty instead. "Ser Rodrik says I'm quick, until I'm tired. He says quickness without sense is a good way to die another man's story." "Ha!" Robert said, pleased. "The old whisker still knows the true of it. Will you take a turn?" If Ser Rodrik had been here, he would have said something to Jon about how such offers were traps. Some of them inescapable, and not all of them sprung by the trapper's malice. But the old knight had gone off to see to some repair, and there was Ned Stark, his eyes a question that carried a warning and a pride entangled in a knot. Jon bowed and took a blunted practice sword because a sharp one would be too much a statement. The noise returned to the yard in a rush as if the crowd had been holding its breath and the air had run out. And from the steps that led to the great hall's doors the queen stood with a hand on the rail, watching, a jewel pinned in the day. They did not cross blades. The king sent his own practiced sword to the ground with a laugh and beckoned forward one of his own men, a guardsman with a face like a thumb. "Give the boy your best," he said, "and may you keep your teeth for your soup." The guard took a stance that Jon recognized as showy. The feet were wrong. They moved. The guard had weight and his strikes were meat hacks. Jon took the measure of him and was surprised to find that his hands were steady. The first exchange was heavy wood on wood, and the shock traveled up his arm to his elbow. The second sent splinters from the edge of the guard's sword. The third, he turned the older man's wrist with a twist he had learned from Rob after Rob had learned it from someone else, and the guard grunted and swore and grinned because it was a good turn. Enough, the king called when it had gone on long enough to show the watching what they wanted to see. His grin made crinkles at the corners of his eyes. Good, he said to Jon, and for a heartbeat it was like being a boy whose father had said his name with approval. Good. He waved dismissed the guard with a flick of fingers and then, to Jon, "Walk with me." Jon did not know whether he had the choice. He glanced once at Ned Stark, and his father's mouth tightened the small fractional degree that meant consent and caution both. Jon damped the heat in his chest with a thought as cold as the snow wind and followed the king across the yard. Ghost paced behind them at a patient, implacable distance. Robert walked without looking where he put his feet, a man so accustomed to watching rooms bend to his step that he forgot that stairs could break a drunkard's neck. He walked toward the keep space and then past it, and beyond that to the steps that led down into the earth. Jon went down into the crypts of Winterfell with a king and a wolf for company. The air changed around them in the way that it always did at the top of those stairs, as if the stones remembered something that the open air had forgotten. Torches set resting on iron brackets made light that seemed not to travel far from the flame, so that faces only a few feet away looked as if they were behind a thin fog. The kings of winter watched them from their pedestals, stone direwolves at their feet, stone swords across their laps, and the sensation of being in the presence of watching was strong enough that Jon could almost have spoken to it. They stopped before the effigy that had made the Hall song earlier stop in Jon's chest. The statue of Lyanna Stark was the work of a carver who had believed that the dead deserved a better honesty than the living, and so he had made her features exact and plain as a morning and as beautiful as a sky that refuses a storm. There were flowers, always, dead and fresh in unhelpful mixture. Ned Stark must have brought them that morning. Jon thought he could tell which were his, arranged without art, with the care of a man who does something beyond habit because he cannot not do it. Robert Baratheon set his hand on the stone like a man setting his hand on a horse's flank to steady himself. He did not speak at first, and when he did his voice was rough as a new road under wagon wheels. "You have your aunt's eyes," he said, not to the statue. Jon did not think he spoke to him either. He spoke to the air between them where old promise hung like breath in cold. "Her eyes were gray," Jon said once the meaning had pressed upon him too long to bear silent. It was not clever. It was not anything but the truth as he knew it. He was not sure why saying it made him feel as if a gate were swinging open somewhere behind him. Robert turned to look at him. In the torchlight his face was a geography of too much. Nose too red, cheeks flushed too high, beard too thick and not thick enough, eyes the blue that sailors fear. "Gray," he said, as if he had never thought to put a word to a color. "Steel." "Then," he smiled with a jag of pain in it, "it is a habit of mine to call things by wrong names when it pleases me to think of them gentler." He let his hand fall from the stone, and the sound it made was like the ending of something small. Ned Stark stood across the space, in a darkness that swallowed the edges of his shape. Jon had not seen him follow them, but he was not surprised. His father had a way of being where he needed to be without tallying how he had come there. His face, which had Luke, de-old last night, looked older still and somehow more entirely itself. "Robert," Ned said. "So," the king said, and now his voice had a bite to it. "You'll say all the things you said then, Eddard? You'll knot the language around our throats until we cannot breathe and call it honor." He shook his head, a small violent action. "I have come north to ask a thing of you, and now that I am here a second thing has thrust itself into my mouth like a word that will not be denied. I will ask both and be damned for it." Ned said nothing. That was not the same as refusing to speak. The quiet lengthened until it took the dimensions of a room they all had to cross. Robert filled it himself rather than go around. "I have a kingdom," he said, "a heavy, unwieldy, ungrateful beast that rudders and breaks fences and tramples the crops of those who try to tend it. It is too much for me when I am weary and not enough when I am drunk. I can keep it in hand, after a fashion. If the beasts I threaten it with fear, I will kill them more readily than I will kill myself. I have a wife. She does not love me. I have children." He paused, and his eyes went not to the darkness where Ned was standing but to the stone girl's face. "I have children," he repeated, and made a noise that might have been a laugh and might have been a cough. "I have a friend who is my better in all the things that matter when a man is done being young. I have the memory of a girl I would have given a kingdom to, and the hands of that friend to hold the memory like a bowl so that I did not spill. I am no man for pretty words. I will say it plainly." Jon felt the air change in him. He did not know what would be said, but he knew when something was going to be said that would be remembered when the thing was old enough to make men forget. He had the sudden, childish urge to run before the words could catch him. He set his heel against Ghost's flank, and the solid animal presence kept him from moving. "I want your bastard," Robert said, and the word did not have the contempt it should have. It sounded not quite like a prayer. It sounded like a bid at dice, thrown with everything a man had. "I want him for mine." Jon forgot how to breathe. He felt the blood go up into his face with the force of a blush a boy cannot hide. The cold in the crypts pressed against his skin, and he could not feel it. He lowered his head because he did not know what to do with his face. He did not look at Ned Stark because looking at him would feel like stealing. "You will not," Ned said softly. "He is my blood." "You give me your daughter," Robert said, and now the words had heat from a different forge. "Give me your son. The realm will be the steadier for it, Ned. I'll have a lad beside me who will not make me think of lions when he smiles. Mother's milk. I am a king. I can do this thing without your word for it, if we are speaking of rights." "You can," Ned said, "but you will not." In the shadows, the king lifted his face as if he could find the carved girl's eyes and make them agree with him. When he lowered it again, the torches set his pupils on fire. "Say the thing," he snapped. "Say the thing that has hung between us for all these years like a cloak you will not shake free to dry." Ned Stark stood there in a silence that was not the same as fear. Jon did not understand any of it, and hated himself for that. He had always thought he was cunning at reading the warping in a person's voice, but here he understood only that something was being spoken that he was not allowed to hear, had never been allowed to hear, and it was about him as if he were a piece of land to be bargained. "You loved her," Ned said, in a tone that made the simple words carry weight enough to crack stone. "Not as boys love, not as men love their vanity. You loved her, and you loved the person you were when you loved her. I will not say the rest. It is not mine to say." Robert breathed out. Some of the rage in him evaporated, leaving a residue of grief. For a flicker of a moment, he looked like a man Jon might have understood without crowns between them. Then the king's shape reassembled itself out of heat. "Take me for a vain fool if you want," he said. "I do not care. I know what the realm knows, and if the realm is to be told something else, you can spit in my cup and call it mead and I'll drink it. Listen to the thing that is true even if every other thing that comes out of my mouth is a lie. I do not trust the heirs I have. I do not want my crown on the head of that boy. I do not want my life's work to be the platform for a lion to show her claws. I want a lad who is not the tool of my enemies. I can call him son and so make it. It would not be the worst lie a king told his kingdom. And if you think I do not see him and remember her, you are blind or unkind." He turned back to Jon and for the first time addressed him directly with the full weight of meaning. "Stand straight, boy. Look your king in the eye." Jon did. He did it because he had been told to. He did it because not to do it would be to throw his life down and see it break. The king's eyes were bright and terrible and human. "You are no man's footnote," Robert said. "If I say you are my son, then you are. If I say you are heir to me, then by the gods you are that. I will say it in the hall tonight and again in the morning and every day after until even the ones who dislike the taste of it must swallow. If I am a liar, I am a king's liar. Will you say me nay?" Jon did not know what to say with his mouth. His heart was loud enough that he felt it in his eyes. He said the thing that came to the surface because there was no room for craft. "My lord, I am..." He stopped. There were too many words and none. He managed, finally, My place is in the north. Robert stared and then barked laughter that was not cruel. You sound like him, he said, flicking a glance at Ned. Always the north with you wolves. Listen to me, the north go. That's where you go if I nail the north to your boots. You will not lose it by riding south. You want to serve, you said it with your eyes if not your tongue. I'll give you service that makes a boy's dream of guarding a wall look like a winter tale told to a fire to make it spit. You'll guard a realm. Ned moved then, not quickly, but with the inevitability of a tide. He came into the light and the shadows fell back from his face and Jon saw that he was a man in pain. Robert, he said, leave this, please. You will do as you will because kings do, but do not force me to help you build this thing on a lie. Robert's jaw clenched. You kept me from my wife, he said in a tone that was not accusatory and was not absolving. You kept me from my grief, and then you kept me from a truth you say is not yours to speak. Always you take and tell me it is for my soul. This time I take. This time, if it is a lie, it is my lie, and I will answer the gods for it when I must. He flung out a hand not unlike a jailer's gesture when he shows a man the sky. He is mine. The words landed in Jon like thrown stones. He stood very still and did not look at either man. He looked at the stone girl and thought nothing at all, because thought would break him. Ghost shifted and pressed his flank harder to Jon's leg, and the heat of the animal seemed like the only thing in the world that was not moving. Ned's breath came out in a careful way. He did not look at Jon either, as if to look would be to hurt him. If you do this, he said to Robert, there will be war. There is always war, Robert said wearily. In some rooms it wears a soft robe and it drinks sweet wine and calls itself peace. But it is war. The Lannisters wage it with smiles and tithes and marriage beds, and it eats at me like a fox at a hen. I cannot keep the fox from the yard by wishing it will find its belly full elsewhere. I will set dogs. He'll be the biggest of them. He cut a glance to Jon that held something like pride. Ned, for the love we bear. Stand. Give me this. I will not ask for your son as hostage. I will ask for him as heir. I will give him every name that is mine to give. I will give him my own if I must stand and swear before gods and men that I spilled seed where I did not. I will take the scorn upon my own head. You will take it, Ned said. He will bear it. Robert's eyes, the blue of deep water, darted. For an instant something in them altered, softened, sharpened. Jon could not tell which. You kept him a bastard, he said levelly. Do not scold me with pity. Ned took that without flinching. I kept him alive, he said, and the stone in his voice made the small torches hiss as if water had been thrown on them. The silence after was the kind that has words in it a man cannot afford to speak. Robert rubbed his face like a man who has come out of the sun into a dim hall and cannot trust what his eyes deliver. Enough, he said finally. I will have it so. The realm will have it so. I've been patient enough with silk tongues and soft knives. I will call the boy mine before my court in your hall. Let them blanch. Let them guess. Let them do their sums and find none of them to their liking. He looked at Jon again, and now his gaze held a jest's gentleness. You'll have to learn to drink, boy. I can drink, Jon heard himself say, and then, stupidly, a little. Robert showed his teeth, and for a moment he was the friend of Eddard Stark in some camp of long ago, not a king. We'll teach you to lie better than that. He turned and began to climb. The torches making his broad back seem to shift in the uncertain light. Ned, come up when you've done telling the dead that this is my fault. Jon and Ned stood together in the shadow of Lyanna Stark's face, with Ghost a warm breath at Jon's knee. The torches burned down, and the smell of old stone and old grief made everything taste stale. Jon waited because to do anything else would be to be wrong. When he could no longer bear waiting, he spoke, and felt the words as if they hurt his teeth. What should I do? Ned Stark did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was the quiet of a river beneath ice. Stand up straight, he said. Do not show them your fear. Do not show them your hunger. Take what is offered if your honor can carry it. Refuse what you cannot bear. Come to me when your heart hurts. Take care of your wolf. He reached, and his hand, scarred and hard, settled for an instant on Jon's shoulder. The touch went through the layers of cloth and skin and into the boy he had been. "Forgive me," he whispered so low that Jon did not know whether it was meant for him or for the stone girl or for the heir. "Forgive me," he said again, no louder. Jon lifted his head. "I will not shame you," he said, and his voice did not shake. He knew, even as he promised, that he could not promise such a thing because it did not belong to him to promise. Still he said it because somehow to say anything else would be to make a hole in himself that would never fill. "Your life is not mine to spend," Ned said. The light of the torches made a pattern on his face that looked like bars. "But a king can spend it without asking either of us. Remember that and survive it." And he stopped. He lifted his hand off Jon's shoulder and his fingers curled as if they held a thing they could not reveal. He took a breath. "Be kind to your sisters, and to Robb, and to Theon if you must." Jon nodded, the smallest of gestures. He did not say that he had always been kind to Arya, and that kindness to Sansa was a matter of delicate work, and that kindness to Theon was a thing one did as one did sparring, with guard in place. He did not say that the idea of riding south made the inside of his stomach go hollow in the way it did when he thought of the top of a tower and no parapet. He did not say that there was a dream he had cherished of black and oath and brotherhood, and that the king's words had picked that dream up and set it spinning. He said nothing and stood, and then he climbed to daylight with his father. Winterfell swallowed a proclamation like the sea swallows a stone. The splash was loud. The ripples lasted longer than anyone admitted and hit shores no one thought to look at. The king stood in the great hall before the banners and called down into the air the thing he had decided. He did it with the swagger of a man who knows that half of ruling is to say what will be and then make it so by continuing to say it. The queen sat while he spoke with a face that would not be read and hands folded in her lap. In the light that came from the high windows, her rings figured like small cold flames. "Lords and good folk of Winterfell," Robert said, because he had the sense of the theater and used it like a sword. "I have come north to ask my old friend to take his place at my side and pull me out of the muck that lords and ladies make of a king's business. He will do it because he is a stubborn man and because I will bully him. Before I ride south, there is another naming." His gaze went to Jon and stayed. "This lad, this wolf-eyed, tight-jawed, long-faced little north thing. He is mine, my son. Jon Baratheon is what I name him this day, an heir to me in the sight of gods and men. I set him beside my other get, and above them if I please, for a king's will is law and I please it so. That is my word. Who calls it a lie calls me a liar." There was not silence after that, because silence was impossible under stone when men breathed and moved. There was a spreading, living sound that was not words, a woof of shock, of people pressing their mouths closed, of people widening their eyes and trying to make them narrower. It went through the hall like a wind. Someone's cup dropped and rolled, and it was offensive to the order of things that such a small clatter could carry in the wake of a king's shout. Someone else made the sign of the three-headed dragon under his cloak out of terror or habit. Someone made the new seven-pointed sign. Someone touched the hilt of a knife. Jon's face was a thing he could no longer feel. He knew his cheeks had blood in them because he could see the world with too much clarity, and because of the way Sansa looked at him, a mixture of fascination and something like disgust that was not directed at him but at the way the world had reshaped itself without asking permission. Arya's mouth had fallen open, and then she shut it with her teeth as if to hold in words that would get her whipped. Robb had gone the color he went when he was near to losing his temper. Theon's smile was the complicated one that meant he had a plan for making something out of someone else's risk. Catelyn Stark's face was a field of frost under which terrible roots went deep. Tyrion Lannister watched with the naked curiosity of someone who had been given a riddle so fine he could not keep his hands from it. Jaime Lannister smiled with the unconcern of a man who has mastered the art of making every event someone else's problem and was perhaps thinking of his reflection in polished steel. The men of the north shifted their weight like wolves in snow. The northern lords, reckless enough to be flattered by being near a crown, looked from one face to another the way men look at cards to see where the trick is. Somewhere near the middle tables, a burly man with a beard like a broom muttered, "Ha! in tones of disgusted admiration. The queen rose at last, and the motion sent a ripple through the hall that could have been awe or could have been fear. "A generous king," she said, in a voice as smooth as cream poured into wine. "How the gods must smile to see so many sins washed with one word. The city will celebrate. The court will cheer. Songs will breed like summer flies." She smiled, and the smile had teeth. "We will rehearse the proper ceremonies, of course. One must be careful with such things. It would be a shame to invite uncertainty." Robert laughed as if she had made a jest instead of the shape of a threat. "My lady wife," he said, "the only uncertainty in this matter is how much I'll drink after I make it done. We'll have a barrel brought into the throne room and see whether your brother's good wine is worth the coin we pay the cask makers." He lifted his cup and drank from it and then slammed it down because that was how he marked the end of a thing. If there had been a way to bear every stare at once, Jon might have attempted it. Instead, he chose one face, his father's, and found in it only a steadiness that he tried to borrow. He bowed his head in something that might have been assent. He heard his own voice say words that were not the ones a boy would have chosen if a boy was choosing. "I am your man, my lord." "Your son," Robert corrected, pleased in a way that looked almost shy in him. "My king," Jon amended, and felt the heavy piece slide into some puzzle in the eyeballs of 1,000 watchers. After, the hall did what halls do as well as any church. It repeated the proclamation in low voices and made its judgments and did the accounts in the margins of conversations. Jon did not wander far because to walk was to be caught, and to be caught was to be asked for explanations he did not have. He had the feeling he had often had in the yard just after he had taken a blow from a wooden blade that had landed too well, that odd ringing in the world, that bright pain behind the eyes, that sensation of having been moved 3 paces backward without the memory of any steps. He stood by a pillar and Ghost sat with his tongue out looking at no one and everyone, and even the men who a day ago had muttered about bad luck when the white wolf passed them gave him a little space. A woman came and curtsied and said a thing about the gods and their mercies. A man who had no place to speak to him came and spoke to him at length about the weather, as if that were safer than the weather that had just broken inside the castle. Jon listened and said little, and when he could he slipped away into the corridor where the draft made the torches gutter. He did not get far. The corridor narrowed and bent, and there, sharp as the corner itself, was a woman in blue wool as fine as water, with a face as poised as a blade. Catelyn Stark, the Lady of Winterfell, who had gone pale as quartz during the king's words and now had color in her cheeks that made her look younger and more dangerous. She stood in the way in a manner that made the way narrower. Her eyes were not the gray of Ned's. They were a different color entirely, and yet he had sometimes felt they were cut from the same stone when they were set at him. "My lady," he said, and the words tasted of ashes. "Do not," she said, and the softness of the voice made it like a pinch. "Do not my lady me today." He did not pretend not to know what she meant. He did not offer to go away because there was no away in this castle that she could not send someone into to fetch him back. "You will carry this with you like a leper's bell," she said, and there was a tiredness in the cruelty that made Jon want, absurdly, to pity her. "No matter what crown is set on your head or whose sweet breath blesses you in a hall with banners, that bell will ring. They will smell it. It will be on your skin." She looked at Ghost, and something in her mouth softened and then tightened again. "And yet you will be admired. There are many small people like to watch the great play at family when they do not believe they have one." "Do you want me to apologize?" Jon asked, and was appalled at the dryness in his own voice. "Tell me what words you want and I will say them. It matters to me that you hear the words you want." She blinked as if startled into another part of herself where this was not the game. Her eyes narrowed. "Tell me you will not hurt my children." "I have never wanted to hurt them," Jon said, and found that he could manage to keep his voice level with an effort that felt like holding a heavy door in wind. "I would rather cut off my hand than see harm come to them. I love them," he heard himself say, and was shocked by the audacity of it, because if there was any suffering the world could ask of him, it would be to put that simple thing into words where someone could kick it like a stool. She held him in her glance a long time, as if measuring the thickness of the plank he had dared to lay across a chasm. "You will not be allowed to do as you please now," she said, as if informing him of something he had not thought to notice. "Others will guide you. They will make use of your wants and your lack of knowledge like handles. Do not trust the Lannisters. Do not trust the men who think they know better than you simply because they are older and have sat more often. Do not trust the ones who smile too readily, and do not trust the ones who speak the language of the South as if it were a prayer. Do not trust the men who cannot be bothered to be cruel in small things, because they do not see you." She paused, and the edges of her mouth trembled once. "Do not trust the kindness of men who have decided that they need to forgive someone. They will choose you because you are easy, and that will be a chain. If you must be chained to your father." "My father," Jon began and stopped. He did not know what to call the man in this corridor, and the thought made his heart give a sick little leap like a misstep on stairs. Her gaze softened 1 degree, like a thaw that cannot commit. "The lord of this castle," she said. "That man has honor like a tree has bark. He cannot be some other thing and live. If you must tether your life to any man, tether it to a man whose honor is a structure and not a costume." She took a breath, and the words that followed seemed to make a path through something she would rather not have walked. "I wanted you to go to the wall," she said. "I wanted that because it was a way. It would have been kinder to all of us except for you. Forgive me that wanting." He had never heard her use that word to him in any form. It flung a door open in him he had not known was there, and cold air poured in, and the scent of pine and of blood. He bowed. "I cannot judge you," he said, and meant it. "My lady." He put the title there because it was a plank that held them above raw water. She moved, and the way was clear. Ghost went ahead, then returned to brush against his leg because the wolf did not like the smell of the corridor, and because the wolf understood the geometry of attack in narrow places and would not be caught wrong-pawed. The rest of that day had the unreality of a dream in which everything is both slower and brighter than it should be. Robert sent for Jon to drink with him and called him son and cuffed him with affection that did not bruise and claimed he remembered a thing about Lyanna that he would not share, not even with Eddard. He made a plan to hunt the next morning and told Jon he would ride beside him, and that he would teach him a king's trick for cutting a boar's throat when you were too drunk to do it properly and the boar was not drunk at all. Ned Stark spoke quietly with men whose beards had bits of bread in them and men whose hair had jewels. In each talk, the talker went away with a face that told a different story, and none of them a good one. Catelyn Stark did not look at Jon again, which was a grace he had not expected. Robb sought him out and touched his shoulder in the yard without words, and that, too, was a grace. Arya found him in the old armory where the light is green as if it comes through water, and asked if he would still teach her to stick with the pointy end. And when he said he would, she nodded, as if this were proof that the world had not unstitched itself entirely. Sansa did not come near him. He saw her once standing with the Queen's women in a ribbon of winter light, her hair like a trove that someone might steal, and she was listening with her whole face in that rapt, dangerous way that made men want to promise her things. The Queen spoke to her with a smile that would have fooled a wiser girl. Jon thought of Sansa's delight in stories of kings and queens and realized he would need to examine every word he spoke to her twice so as not to be cruel by accident. The one who did come to him uninvited and without ceremony was Tyrion Lannister. He appeared at Jon's side in a corner of the yard where pigeons gathered on the bit of parapet that warmed first in the sun, and the warmth had lured Jon there like a cat. Tyrion hoisted himself up in a manner that suggested he had more practice than dignity in such perching, and offered Jon a wineskin from which steam rose faintly in the cold. "You should drink more," he said. "It makes everything tolerable for a very short time, which is the only honest promise anything makes." Jon took a cautious mouthful because to refuse would be an answer and to drink deeply would be another, and he did not yet know which he wanted to make. The wine was better than most drunk at Winterfell. It had a depth to it like a well dug in a place where the soil is rich and dark. "What do they say in your rooms?" he asked, and then wished he had not. He had not meant to care. He had learned that caring about what men said about him was a way to bleed to death over time. "In my rooms," Tyrion said, pleased. "Here? They say everything, dear boy. The men who have always disliked your lord father for being sober dislike him now for being bold. The men who always wanted your queen to be less beautiful and less Lannister want her to be less angry. The men who cannot count beyond fingers and toes are trying to work out what it means, and the men who can count to 100 are trying not to show that they're doing that in public, because no one likes a man who does sums in a hall of music. In the queen's rooms, they say that Casterly Rock has long memories. In your father's rooms, they say that honor and love of old friends are not in the law books, and yet they are the only way a man keeps from becoming a thing. He tipped the skin toward Jon. In my rooms, I say I am glad of a new story. I was tired of the old one where my sister's children treat the realm like a sleep-warmed bed and my brother looks at everything as if it's a mirror. Will you be my enemy too? Jon asked and could not tell whether he hoped for a yes or a no. I plan to be many things, Tyrion said cheerfully. Enemy might be one. Friend could be another. More likely both and sometimes on the same day. I will make a wager with you, since Robert has reminded the world that wagers are as good as oaths if you shout them loud enough. I wager that if you live long enough, you will change your mind 3 times about each person you think you know today. That includes yourself. That is a generous bet. It gives you leave to be wrong and still win. I always allow myself generous odds. It is my one virtue. I have heard that generosity is a virtue, Jon said, and found that his mouth could make a smile without lying. It's a vice done properly, Tyrion said. Watch the queen. Do not battle her directly. She was born to palaces and learnt from an age so young men would be whipped for even thinking of it how to make room speak for her when she does not open her mouth. When you say a thing, imagine it put into her mouth. If she can make it sound foolish, you must find another way. Listen to Stannis when you reach King's Landing. He is a man who counts truths like a banker counts coins, without joy, without sorrow, without spending them. But his ledger will teach you something if you can bear the scowl. Stannis, Jon repeated. The name felt like a shrug. The king's brother, Tyrion said. The one even humor gave up on. He will have thoughts about this announcement. He and thoughts are uneasy bedfellows, but he will have them. His eyes danced. Renly, on the other hand, will have thoughts that dress well and smell nice. He may attempt to set them on you like hounds because he likes to see a young buck run. He paused and looked Jon over with a consideration that wasn't like the queen's. It had no malice in it, only appetite for puzzles. Do you know who your mother was? He asked abruptly. Jon shook his head, and that old hollowness opened again inside him like a door left ajar in winter. No. Do you wish to? Yes, Jon said, because the lie would have been too cold even for this air. Good, Tyrion said. That will keep a flame alive in you. People who do not want to know about themselves are dangerous because they will turn and make it about you all of a sudden. He hopped down from the stone, and Jon almost reached to steady him without thinking and then did not, because you do not steady a man who will kill you if he falls in his own way. When the queen's lion lies down with the king's stag, the lion cubs eat the stag, not the other way around. Remember that, and do not trust dogs men throw to you as a sign of kindness. They will bite you and call it training. He stepped away and made a little bow with his shoulders rather than his back, because the back did not bend without pain. Good day, Prince Snow. He did not wait to see whether Jon flinched at the title. He went away humming a fragment of a song about sailors and bad weather and pocketed dice. Night came early after that day, as if the sun, too, had been shocked into a retreat. Robb sought Jon out and failed to find the words he wanted. He offered his fist and Jon struck it with his, and that, between them, was a language. Arya came and called him stupid, and punched him on the shoulder hard enough to make him hiss, and then hugged him with a ferocity that blotted out being wise. Sansa did not come. Theon came and said the thing Theon had to say because he was made that way. You lucky bastard. And then something about what he would do with Kay. King's Landing if he had it the way men speak about a woman they have not touched. And Jon listened without comment, because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a drowning man is to let him splash until his arms tire and he stops, and then pull him out if he looks like he is about to go under for good. Jon did not pull Theon out. He let the boy splash. Ned Stark came to Jon's bedchamber late, after the castle had made up its mind to be asleep and the noises of men had turned small, individual, as if no one wanted to make a sound that matched another's. He entered without knocking in that way lords and fathers do. Jon stood because it felt right to stand. Ghost raised his head and set it back down, deciding this man's presence did not require movement. "You will ride south with the king," Ned said without preface. "There is no hope of preventing that now without tearing everything we are to shreds." Jon had known it. Hearing it was another thing. He felt it like a hand at the back of his neck pushing him into a cold trough. He did not mind the cold so much as the hand. "I will bring up a small guard," Ned continued, pacing because he could not keep still when he was forced into a shape of doing that he disliked. "Men I trust. Benjen cannot ride with us because of his vows. I would have had my brother beside you if I could. I'll have Jory and others. We will move as slow as the king will permit, which is not very slow. You will sit a horse beside a man who talks more loudly than a river. You will learn to make your face his music." "I can ride," Jon said, and the simplicity of the remark made Ned's mouth twitch in something like a smile. "I know," Ned said. "You ride like a Stark, and the gods help anyone who tries to reform that seat. You'll go to King's Landing, and you will keep your eyes open and your mouth shut as often as you can stand it. You will write to me. You will write to Robb. You will send Arya such tales as will make her laugh without making her want to be a sellsword. You will not let Sansa's sweetness and pride be a lure for you into saying things you do not believe. You will not let Theon's laughter make you careless." He stopped and looked at Jon, and in that look was a clumsy sufficiency of love that made Jon have to look away. "I will not ask you to refuse this," he said. "It would be wrong of me, but if there comes a day when you can tell me you do not want it, I will be glad beyond measure. There is nothing wrong with being heir to the Iron Throne if you were born for it. There is much wrong with it if you were not." "What was I born for?" Jon asked, and because the question came out, he realized that the boy he had been had held it in his chest all these years and had not known its weight. Ned regarded him with the patience of a man who chops wood after a frost and waits for the log to crack in its own time. "You were born for the thing all men are born for, to choose. Our gods do not whisper to priests, and they do not send down lightnings to burn answers into the earth. They give us long cold winters so that when the fire is warm we know that it is good. They give us family so we can learn what we want and what we are. You choose. You live with it. And if you choose wrongly, you try again if you can." He hesitated. "If you choose rightly, men will still say you chose wrongly because it served them to say it so. You cannot let them be your conscience. They will get you killed." Jon nodded because nodding was a way to show that words had landed. He did not trust his voice. He looked down at his hands, which were nicked and rough. He thought very briefly of the smooth hands he had seen at the high table, the ones that belonged to men who did not know how to tie a girth or stop a nosebleed, and he felt a flash of contempt that he would need to school out of himself if he was to live among them. Ned put a small wrapped parcel on the table beside Jon's bed. "Your mother made this for you," he said, and then, when Jon's head snapped up, he made that twitch of mouth again, the one that did not quite smile. "No, that was a cruelty. I am sorry. Your mother did not knit." He drew back the cloth to reveal a small thing made of leather, a hand case for a writing set, with a place for a small bottle and a place for a pen, neatly stitched and too fine for cheap market wares. "Catelyn had this made," he said, and did not look at Jon as he said it because Ned Stark could be brave in many ways, but he could not always be looked at when he was being kind. "So that you could write to us. She bade me tell you that parchment in the south often smells of smoke and flowers, and you should ask for the other kind if you find yourself with a headache." Jon stared at the thing. It seemed a small thing. It was not small, and in the same way it was not made of leather and thread. "I will write," he said. He did not trust himself not to say more than that. "Good," Ned said. He stood there a moment longer as if he had forgotten a thing and could not remember it no matter how many times he turned around in his mind. He raised a hand and let it fall, a gesture without place to go. "Sleep," he said. "In the morning we will pretend this is all simple. That is the only way to get men and horses to go anywhere at all." They did as men do in the morning. They made a noise at the cold, and then they began to move. The royal party's wagons loaded and groaned, and the kitchen sent out food enough to make the poor at the gate press tight. A dozen knights argued over whether a certain piece of armor would endure the road. 3 of them declared themselves experts. None of them had ever oiled a piece of leather. The queen dressed in a room that had been heated to an impossible warmth and came out looking like a story. The king broke his fast with bread he tore and meat he ate with his fingers and told a tale so ribald that the men who laughed at it loudest had not understood it.
Jaune Saddledash.
His own horse and soothed it when Ghost's presence made it show the whites of its eyes. Robb watched him and made a face that could have been a jest and could have been a prayer. Arya ran cheeks bright up to the steps until a septa caught her by the sleeve and took her back in a weaving path like a fisherman playing a fish. Jon found Sansa by the well. She wore a cloak the color of a summer lake, and the light made the fur at the shoulders look like something a very small animal had been persuaded to do. She looked at him, and he saw in the look a struggle as brave and real as any fight between men with blades. Her face was made for grace, and it did grace almost without her having to decide to. But beneath it was something flintier. She put them on. He watched her eyes change. "You will be a prince," she said, and her tone was the complicated thing between awe and disapproval that girls were taught to perfect. "I will be whatever men call me," he said, and meant it. "You should be careful around the queen," she said unexpectedly. And when he looked at her, she flushed with the shock of having his attention and the shock of what she had said. "I only mean..." She smiles and smiles, and I kept thinking of a story where a lady smiles and at the end everyone is dead. "I'll be careful," he promised. And when she nodded, it was with the grave authority of a girl who spends her nights in a world woven of words and expects the day to match. When he swung into the saddle in the yard and the king's party began to snake out of the gate like a dragon made of horses and men and creaking wood, Jon felt the whole of Winterfell under him, as if it were a living thing that had to be stepped away from. He looked back once. The walls were the same as they had been yesterday. The steam rising from the hot springs was the same. The Godswood's top was the same, and the faces in the gate were faces he knew. He would come back, he told himself. Men always said that when they left home. Some of them did it. That thought made him straighten in the saddle until the leather creaked with his spine. Robert brought his horse up beside Jon and leaned over and clapped him on the shoulder so hard Jon thought he might be knocked sideways. "You do not ride like a courtier," the king said happily. "Thank the gods. If I have to look at one more floppy-armed lordling pretending a saddle is a chair, I'll drag him by his boots." "Yes, Jon began and stopped. "Yes." Robert's laugh shook his beard. He started to tell a story about a camp in the rain and a woman with a laugh like bells and a man with a scar that kept changing sides. And he was in the middle of a detail about how the tent had collapsed when his horse chose that moment to shy and try to dance sidewise into a ditch. He sawed at the reins as if he were threshing grain, cursed, got the animal under him again, and grinned over at Jon as if to say that this looked very much like kingship. Jon smiled because he could not help it. The road lay ahead and the world lay ahead and something dark and old lay ahead as well, and if longing had had a taste for a place called the Wall, it now learned the flavor of a place called King's Landing. Ghost loped beside, tongues lolling, eyes bright. A piece of winter moving south. The wind had teeth, but the sun showed its face like a man who has remembered a joke he was saving. Jon lifted a hand once as the gate shrank behind them. Not a wave, not a farewell, merely an acknowledgement of stone and warmth and a boy's room where a writing case sat waiting to be used. And then he put his hand back on the bridle, and when the king urged his mount to a canter because the day required it, Jon set his heels to his horse and matched him. The first day on the road was a lesson in endurance. It was also a lesson in attention. Jon looked more than he had ever looked. He looked at small villages that clung to the edge of the great road like limpets on a hull, and he looked at the way the farmers came out to see the king like stones that had lifted themselves. He looked at the men of the king's guard, each one chosen for size the way a winter chooses the biggest trees to burn last. He looked at the queen, whose posture did not alter with the miles the way a song does not change even when sung in different rooms. He looked at Tyrion, who made riding seem like part of reading, and at Jaime, who made anything he did seem like part of standing in front of a mirror. He looked at the small folks' faces and tried to catalog their expressions so that later, when he made promises, he would know to whom he had made them. As they camped the first night beneath a stand of bare poplar whose branches clicked together like old women with their tongues, The king called half the party into his fire with promises of a boar hunt that would be grand, and the queen called the other half with promises of being noticed by her, which was for some men the same as being told you could trade your grain for gold. Jon went neither place. He ate with the Northmen near the wagons, under a tarp where the smoke was made to behave by the clever way Hullen had rigged the canvas. He listened to them talk about what it meant for the Lord of Winterfell to go south to be hand, and he listened to them talk about what it meant for a bastard to be prince, and he listened to them complain about the taste of the food, which was less about the food than about the strange taste their mouths had from all this new. When they had settled and the noise had found its level, Jon went out and found a piece of dark where the stars were visible through a gap in the tarp and sat on an upturned crate and tried to write a letter to Arya. It was more difficult than walking to the top of the highest tower. He did not want to be clever, and he did not want to be the sort of honest that frightens children. He wrote that the king was larger than the world and laughed louder, and that Ghost had taken a dislike to a knight who had not done anything wrong so far as Jon could tell, and that this was a warning that should be noted. He wrote that he would teach her to stick with the pointy end still if they allowed her to visit him in the south. They meaning God's men honor. He wrote that Sansa was going to be noticed in King's Landing, and that he would stand nearby with a bucket of water if anyone's hair caught fire from being admired. He wrote that he was thinking of her and that this world would be less sharp if he did not. He stopped and looked at what he had written and found that he had written a new language by mistake. He folded the paper anyway and sealed it with a bit of wax pressed under the hilt of his knife. He then began a letter to Robb, and the words were easier because he could write in their private language of yard and bluff and shared looks across tables. He told Robb that the South would hate his snow and he would not care, and that he should watch Theon, who would start a fire for warmth and then dance so near it he would burn, and that their father looked like a man who has put on a heavy coat and will not take it off until spring because he refuses to admit that it no longer fits. He told Robb that he missed him with his hands as well as his head, and that he would count their steps apart in the way that men count prayers. He sealed that letter too and did not cry as he did it, which pleased him because he did not want to learn that habit. On the second day, the queen sent for him. The summons came with the sort of formal language that made it clear this was not a thing Jon could ignore, even if the pretense was that she invited him to share a moment at midday to view the ways the light played upon the snow. He dressed as well as he could, which meant he put on his least frayed cloak and made sure his boots were not muddy. He went to the queen's pavilion and was made to wait a moment, and then he was ushered into a space that had been made out of canvas and rugs and silver lamps into something that would have offended the tents of kings in a superstition story. The queen was alone, which was a lie because no queen is ever alone, but there were no other bodies in the room. She stood by a table where fruit had been set out as if this were a summer. The fruit was beautiful in a way that made Jon think of kidneys in a butcher's tray. Too red, too arranged. She lifted half an orange and smelled it as if testing some memory. "You are a quiet boy," she said. "I suppose that is to be expected, being from the north." "I speak when I have something to say," Jon said. He wished his voice would not insist on sounding stark, no matter what words he hung from it. He gave her a little bow that he hoped covered 1,000 courtesies he did not know how to display. "A virtue in a counselor," she said pleasantly. "Not so in a prince. We will have to see whether there is a tongue in there behind all those teeth. I have heard the king has bestowed one upon you." "He has named me his son," Jon said carefully, and the ground beneath those words tilted like the deck of a ship. "Has he?" she said, as if discussing the habit of ducks to freeze in ponds. "So fortunate that a man can bestow blood from his mouth. We women have to do it the old way, with pain and not a drop of wine to ease it." She smiled to show she had not meant him to be frightened by it. "Do you believe yourself his son?" she said suddenly, like a needle slipped between the threads of a seam. Jon could have said many cleverer things. He said the thing he had practiced saying to his own face in a bowl of water and had not succeeded in making convincing. "I believe I am what men believe me to be when they have power." She studied him as if he were a map. "My father once told me," she said, "that if an arrow is coming at your eye, it does not help to believe you are a stag. You should move. You have been given power of a particular kind. You do not yet know how to get out of the way of anything with it." "I will learn," Jon said, because he had nothing else to offer. From whom? The question cracked the air. Your father. She made the word into something that tasted like splinters. The king. She made the word into something that tasted like sour wine. My dwarf brother, perhaps? From my lord father? Jon said, letting the title sit between them, heavier than it looked, and from the wolf at his side, who thumped his tail once as if to remind the queen that he had teeth too. How dutiful, she murmured. She looked at Ghost and did not move. I had a dog when I was a girl, she said, as if this were a thought that had just wandered into her mind. It bit me. I made my father kill it. Jon felt the heat go up the back of his neck. My wolf does not bite my family, he said, more sharply than was politic. His hand went to Ghost's ears and found they were soft. My queen, he added, and tried to put a little too much respect into the title to make up for the sharpness. An old boy's trick that sometimes works. It is good, she said, as if she had not meant to say anything and the words had surprised her. It is good to love something that will not love you less when you are foolish. She lifted the orange fragment and bit into it. Juice ran down her wrist and she licked it with a gesture that was practiced and yet somehow not seductive, only hungry. You will forgive me if I do not call you prince yet, she said as lightly as wool. It takes me time to adapt. I am a cautious woman, whatever gossip would prefer to say. I will be whatever people call me, Jon said again, and this time the words felt less like surrender and more like a choice. Do try, she murmured, and then, with the brisk authority of someone who has been told she nods too much, there is a tourney to be given upon our return to the city. It would be fitting for the king to present his new son to his court in a manner that brings us joy and bounty, and not in a hall full of wolf hair and men who smell of tallow. You will see that your armor is in order. A prince must wear the look of war even when he is going to be dragged into the parlor. My armor is in order, Jon said, which might have been the only boast he could make in that room without being laughed at. How splendid, she said, and dismissed him with a turn of her head, which was a thing queens do without knowing it is a power and men do without knowing it is an insult. He went out into the air, and it was good to be able to taste it again. Ghost breathed and made a small sound that could have been disapproval and could have been a cough. Jon touched the wolf's head in apology for bringing him into that place. He did not look back. Days ran together on the King's Road, each with its own small knot of strangeness. Jon learned the names of men whose arms he had watched and never thought to ask the man behind the sigil whether he loved or what frightened him when he closed his eyes. He learned where the ground turned soft under the crust of frost, that a horse's weight would break into a mud that sucked boots, and he learned which of the king's men would push a small girl out of the way to get at a loaf. He learned that Tyrion's wit was not a wall against loneliness but a net for it. He learned that a queen could look at you as if you had stolen something from her and make you wonder whether perhaps you had. He learned that the south smelled different even in winter, not of cold alone, but of damp wood and rot that is not yet rot, of river and of wine. He woke once in the dark with Ghost's teeth bared and a hand at his throat. Not a hand on his skin, but a hand on the air there, as if someone had put something around his neck in his sleep. He lay still until the feeling passed and then went out into the night and found Ned Stark sitting by a low fire, the coals banked to last, his face a thing made of shadow and thought. I dreamt of the crypts, Jon said without preamble. I dreamt she was waking. Ned did not look up. So do I, he said, and the words were a gift Jon had not expected. So do I. On the seventh day, where the road curved around a copse of fir and then gave view to a low field where the stubbled remains of barley poked up like bristles from a pig's back, there was a wreck. A wagon had overturned on the road, and the men who ought to have righted it had not done, because they had been attacked. The bodies were sprawled in positions that told a different story than the one that had been shouted when the king had first demanded to know what in all the hells had happened here. They had not died fighting. They had died surprised. Robert's face went an ugly purple that meant someone behind him clenched their teeth, because if he fell off his horse now he might break his neck. He thundered. He ordered the guard forward. He swore that he would have the head of whatever gutter rat had done this and make him a crown. The queen sat her horse with that immobility that makes one wonder if there is a person within and not a carving, and her voice cut through his like the point of a spear through canvas. "The boy," she said. "Keep the boy back." Jon could have insisted. He could have declared himself something a king had said he was. He could have demanded and made of his demand a statement. He looked at the sprawled bodies instead and saw that one of them was a boy of perhaps 12 and that someone had cut his shoes off because they were still good. He swallowed and did not press forward. Ghost stood bristling, a low growl in him like a purr gone sour. The king's men went forward. The king went forward because making speeches was a thing he sometimes did because it made him feel like his body still belonged to him and not to a legend. Jon waited with his father's men and watched the way the crows came, the way they had the sense of the dead that cities have of plague. From that field, nothing useful was learned but this: the world will always present you with the wrong deaths at the wrong time. Jon carried the image the rest of the day like a splinter and did not speak of it. That night he did not try to write a letter. On the 8th day, they made camp by a river with ice at its edges and black water in its belly. Jon washed with it and felt alive to the point of pain. He sat watching the water until someone sat beside him with a grunt, and it was the king, who had somehow got away from his people like a man slipping from a noose. "You sit like him," Robert said, and Jon did not need to ask who. "It is a way to keep my back warm," Jon said, as if this were a joke. Robert looked at the river and shook his head. "I can hear them," he said, "every day. The voices that will make out that I'm in my cups and cannot tell a falcon from a partridge. I do not care, and then I do." He chucked a stone at the ice and it skittered and fell into the black. "I will put a crown on your head if the gods let me live long enough to do all the things I mean to. I will put it there and I will laugh at the men who thought they knew me. I will." He stopped, and the word he did not say hung like a bell that has not been rung. "If I cannot," he said, "you must be what I say you are anyway." "How does a man do that?" Jon asked, his voice so low it was nearly part of the river. Robert's laugh was as soft as he could make it, which was not very. "With stubbornness," he said, "and with friends. I've been lucky in one of those. I intend to be lucky in the other." He slanted a glance. "I will put you in the charge of men who can teach you to survive this without becoming the sort of man you would loathe. Some of them will make you loathe them. That is one way to teach as well." "Will Stannis teach me?" Jon asked, half in jest to turn the shape of the conversation. "Stannis will lecture you," Robert said, almost affection in the sigh. "You can learn from a lecture if you can stay awake. Renly will make you smile, and if you do not watch your pockets you will find that he has borrowed your smile to wear to another party. Ser Barristan can teach you to stand still and be honorable and be a legend and be forgotten all in a day. Littlefinger will teach you to count. Varys will teach you to whisper. Nather will teach you to keep your soul. Ned." He stopped and then slapped his hand on his thigh. "Ned will teach you how to be a man your children can trust when you tell them there are monsters in the dark and that you will kill the monsters if they come. That is worth more than all the gold hammered into all the crowns that fools have ever melted and remelted to fit their heads. Listen to him even when he's wrong. He is wrong less than most." "I will," Jon said, and believed it. The river moved onward as if it could not imagine any other trajectory. The moon lifted itself over the black water like a coin being thumbed upward. The king rose with a grunt that was almost an apology to his own body. "Come on," he said. "We'll go back and frighten the cooks into including another course at dinner. That's nearly as good as justice." They rode on. News rode faster than men do. By the time they reached the neck, there were rumors perched like crows on the mileposts. They had grown their own feathers in the telling. In some, Robert had proclaimed a dragon as his heir. In some, the heir had been carved from the heart of a tree and bled. In some, Eddard Stark had punched the king in the face and they had embraced afterward because they were such men. The truth was plainer and stranger and retreated before observation like a shy animal. Jon learned to keep his face like the outside of a pewter mug. He learned to accept it when men bowed where they would not have bowed 2 weeks before. He learned to return a nod in such a way as to not make enemies of those who wished to be neutral. He learned that the South had more words for courtesy than the North had for snow. He did not forget what the wall had looked like in his mind. He made a place for it and went to it nightly. He did not speak to Ned of it again. He did not speak to anyone of it. When he closed his eyes, sometimes the wall rose before him like a white thing that breathed, and sometimes the Iron Throne glinted with a light that did not warmth, and sometimes a room in Winterfell that had no fire and yet had warmth did not change, and sometimes the face of a stone girl opened its mouth and said something without sound. He learned to wake himself from those dreams by moving his fingers until Ghost, asleep at his feet, twitched in echo and woke to climb onto his chest and place his heavy head there so Jon could feel the weight and count his heart. As the land south of Moat Cailin unrolled, gentler than the north and with winter seeming more an idea than a rule, Jon felt something that was not betrayal and was not hope. It was the sensation of walking through a door he had not asked to be opened for him and finding a room that belonged to him anyway. It felt like standing under a low ceiling that pressed down upon him and like looking up at branches that bent under a weight of snow. It felt like being looked at and seeing himself reflected in the eyes of men who did not know what they were seeing and so would call it anything. It felt like the first breath after a sprint. It felt like the moment at the top of a tower when you have not yet looked down. He did not know then, could not know what the South would make of him or what he would make of the South. He did not know who would try to own him with their secrets or their lies or their love. He did not know that a boar will always be a boar no matter how the hunters argue about how best to drive it into the spear. He did not know that a queen's smile can be the sharpest of blades, and that a king's laughter can be a net thrown over a room. He did not know the names of the blades that would be drawn in his name and against it. He knew only this, that he would stand, and that he would choose, and that he would be held like any man between the jaws of what he had chosen and what had chosen him. He touched Ghost's head, felt the rasp of tongue against his knuckles, and looked south until the air itself seemed to tremble with the city that lay beyond the horizon like some great beast at rest. He was called a prince now. He would hear that word as often as he had heard bastard and more softly. He would try to be neither word and both. He would try, and in the trying, he would become the man who could be heir in a world that did not want him to be, and son in a world that would not have him be anything else.